Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, where during the previous day, between the 1st and the 2nd of June of 2026, the Russians carried out one of the biggest attacks since the beginning of the special military operation. Yesterday, between the 1st and the 2nd of June, the Russians used hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles to attack the capital of Ukraine, and during the night we received a lot of videos and pictures on this matter. We are talking about the previous night. And of course, yesterday in the evening, on the evening of the 2nd of June of 2026, nobody had doubts that the Ukrainians would strike back, that the Ukrainians would carry out a retaliatory strike with the purpose to deal probably the same damage that the Russians dealt to the Ukrainians. And yesterday in the evening, pro-Ukrainian sources published this picture. This was the first picture published by pro-Ukrainian sources, where we can see the approximate routes of the Ukrainian drones that were flying, as you can see, mainly in the northern direction. So according to these lines and according to these arrows, some of the drones were moving in the direction of the capital of the Russian Federation, the city of Moscow, and some of these drones were moving in the northern direction towards the northern capital of Russia, the city of St. Petersburg. As for the city of Moscow, during the previous nights, the mayor of the city made lots of interesting statements. He announced that an attack of 20 drones heading towards Moscow was repelled by Russians, and this update was published yesterday somewhere in the evening. And of course, when talking about this map, I have lots of questions on this matter. And the most important question, how is it possible? So this is the most important question I had this morning when I woke up. How is it possible? The thing is, and we have discussed this situation many times since the beginning of June, the Russians these days were attacking significantly the most northern parts of Ukraine, the northern parts of Chernihiv region and the northern part of the Sumy region, just with one purpose: to destroy as many as possible trucks, to destroy as many as possible gas stations, to destroy as many as possible logistics sites, and so on. And the Russians were pursuing just one target, just one purpose: not to allow the Ukrainians to use the northern parts of Ukraine as a launching site, not to allow the Ukrainians to use these territories for trucks to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. And even through this video, we can see that the Russians, as a result of attack with drones, destroyed another gas station, and at least the Russians destroyed 2 or even 3 trucks that probably the Ukrainians were planning to use as launching sites, as drone carriers, with the purpose to attack later deep inside of the territory of Russia. Another important video was also published from the same area, and here we can see how exactly the Russians were attacking these trucks. The Russians provided additional proofs that indeed the Ukrainians used trucks to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia, and here we can see how the Russians, as a result of a reconnaissance operation, discovered this truck, another truck in this area, and then the Russians destroyed this vehicle with a drone. So the Russians published lots of videos on this matter, and I'll repeat my question: how is it possible that the Ukrainians managed to use these northern territories of Ukraine to launch hundreds of drones in the direction of the territory of Russia with the purpose to deal significant damage or with retaliatory purposes? By the way, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation this morning stated that during the overnight attack, the Ukrainians used 354 drones to attack the territory of the Russian Federation. And you know that this is a very interesting question, and probably this question has a very simple answer. So let's discuss this answer in details. During this overnight attack, during this retaliatory strike that was carried out by the Ukrainians, the armed forces of Ukraine were trying to hit and to damage significantly the city of St. Petersburg. This is the northern capital of the Russian Federation, and during the night and this morning we received lots of pictures and lots of videos from this area. So let's discuss them in detail. So as you can see, according to the overnight attack and according to this morning attack, the Ukrainians hit the some port infrastructure, oil tanks on the territory of the port infrastructure, and as a result of these attacks, the Ukrainians managed to deal significant damage. So in this video, we can see the consequences of attack, a very big, a very huge black smoke over the settlement of St. Petersburg broke out right after the Ukrainians attacked this territory. In this video, we can see more scenes, more episodes, more videos about the same episode but from different angles. Here we can see the Ukrainian drone that was flying over the city of St. Petersburg without any resistance from the Russian air defense systems. Here we can see an explosion, another oil tank was damaged, probably significantly, so there were hundreds of drones. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Ukrainians damaged not just these oil tanks and the port infrastructure of the city of St. Petersburg. The sources and pro-Ukrainian sources mainly stated that the Ukrainians also managed to hit several military ships that the Russians used to secure their shadow fleet while moving through the Baltic Sea and so on. So indeed, the Ukrainians managed to deal significant damage, but all these videos, all these updates don't give us the answer to the question, how is it possible? And the answer is very simple, as I told you. The thing is that during the previous night, we received lots of videos and lots of updates from territories around the city of St. Petersburg. For example, this is probably the most important video that was published during the night and during this morning, and in this video we can see a drone that was flying in the direction of the capital, of the northern capital of Russia, the city of St. Petersburg, and this drone was flying from the area of the Gulf of Finland, not from the territory of Russia, not from any other territory, but from the territory of the Gulf of Finland. This video was made by pro-Russian sources, by locals basically, by people of the city of St. Petersburg. Here we have this drone, and if we return back to the map, we would see that this drone, launched by the armored forces of Ukraine, was moving along this direction. So obviously, and when talking about these arrows and these lines, we see that these lines have nothing common with this map, because the Ukrainian drone most likely wasn't flying something like this to attack the territory of Russia. And even if this drone was flying like this, one thing is clear: this drone crossed the airspace of the Baltic states. And on this matter, we also have lots of very interesting updates. During the evening and during the morning and nights of the 3rd of June of 2026, several sources published updates on the matter of alerts through the state of Estonia. Air raid alert issued for 6 countries in Estonia overnight during the Ukraine's mass attack on northwestern part of Russia, the city St. Petersburg. Air raid alert issued in several regions that was stated by Estonian defense forces. Ukrainian long-range drones were flying near crossing Estonian airspace. So this is the most important thing. Another article published by another expert: during the attack on St. Petersburg, air raid alerts were issued 8 out of 15 countries in Estonia due to threats from Ukrainian drone flights, which means that during the overnight attack, the Ukrainians were using the airspace of Estonia. But once again, the question is whether the Ukrainians were flying like this to attack the territory of St. Petersburg, or the Ukrainians at the beginning were launching their drones from the Gulf of Finland and they were moving through the airspace of Estonia to attack the city. As of now, we don't have the answer to this question, but one thing is clear, that according to these updates, even according to this video, we see that most likely the airspace of NATO countries was involved during this overnight attack. And once again, as a result of attack, port infrastructure and several fuel tanks were damaged and destroyed. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Ukrainians managed to hit and to maybe even destroy or to damage several military ships that the Russians were using for their shadow fleet purposes. They were securing their roads. And another important thing, that today the major or the big Petersburg Economic Forum begins. So today, lots of people from different countries are coming for St. Petersburg to discuss the business, to talk about the business. And for example, yesterday in the evening, the special aide Ushakov made lots of very interesting statements on this matter. For example, according to information we have, the official delegation of the United States will also participate in the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum that begins today on the 3rd of June of 2026. The business program of the forum will include government officials from 76 countries with a total of about 20,000 participants from more than 100 states, noted the presidential aide. Another important thing that according to information we have, Putin was planning to deliver a major speech on June 5th, announced by the president assistant Ushakov. So this was the Russians were planning to carry out the biggest economical event on the territory of St. Petersburg with the participation of the delegation from the United States of America, which is a very big sign. And we see that the Ukrainians during this day, at the beginning of this forum, carried out a massive attack, trying to deal as much as possible damage to different facilities and different sides of the territory of the city of St. Petersburg. This is probably the biggest escalation since the beginning of the special military operation. The most important thing that the city of St. Petersburg is a homeland of the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. So I'm not sure whether the Russians are going to strike back immediately. So during the next hours, probably the Russians won't do this. The Russians will wait until the end of this economical forum, which most likely ends on the 5th of June of 2026, and probably during the 6th of June of 2026, the Russians will carry out retaliatory strike using hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles. And telling the truth, maybe even the Russians are going to use the Oreshnik system once again. And most likely the Russians will attack not just some facilities or something like different, industrial zones. The Russians most likely will attack decision-making centers. And another important thing I would like to point to attention that if you remember during the previous weeks, the Russians issued a lot of warnings and a lots of ultimatums related to the situation that the diplomatic missions of Kyiv must leave the city of Kyiv before the beginning of the Russian massive attack. But if you remember, the diplomatic missions of the European countries rejected those proposals and ultimatum from the Russian side. So that is why the Russians were forced to, when they were attacking the city of Kyiv between the 1st and the 2nd of June of 2026, the Russians were forced to count on this information. They were forced to change their plans and to carry out as much as possible precision strikes. And if you noticed, since the end of the Russian massive attack, we haven't received even a single statement or article published by European countries on the matter that Russian missiles hit diplomatic missions and so on. So the Russians didn't attack the diplomatic missions of the European countries, and we see that as a result of the retaliatory strike from the Ukrainian side, we see that the Ukrainians were targeting the Petersburg Economic Forum, which means that the Ukrainians decided not to probably to save this situation. And obviously, if the Ukrainians continue attacking the territory of St. Petersburg with drones and missiles, there are very high chances that the Russians would be forced to close this economical forum much earlier than it was expected. Another important thing is that this morning, the Secretary of NATO, General Secretary of NATO, Mark Rutte, arrived in the city of Kyiv, and we understand that he is going to serve as a human shield. Obviously, the Russians will not attack the city of Kyiv during these hours and during these days, or maybe this just the day, while the General Secretary is on the territory of Ukraine in the area of the city of Kyiv. And this is exactly what Zelensky does usually during massive attacks and when he waits or expects retaliatory or a strike from the Russian side. Now let's move further. and let's discuss the situation through the southern regions. During the previous nights, according to information we have, lots of attacks were also recorded in this direction. The sources stated that, according to information we have, the armed forces of Ukraine attacked the city of Jankoy, more precisely, its railway station, and these videos were published from this area. As a result of attack, the train was completely destroyed, and this is not a military train, this is a regular train that civilians use for their daily purposes. Another important situation took place in the area of the settlement of Yinakiva. In this video, we can see how a Ukrainian drone attacked a bus. As a result of this attack, casualties among civilians were recorded. So, as you can see, during the previous days, lots of attacks from the Ukrainian side were recorded, not just on objects of critical energy or fuel infrastructure, but we can see that the Ukrainians were attacking different transport infrastructural objects through the territory between Crimea and Donetsk region. As for the central area, during the previous night, also attacks were recorded from the Russian side. In this video, we can see some power station, and as a result of attack, this power station was completely destroyed. The Russians were using Iran drones for these purposes. So this is the Nikolska power station that was destroyed by Russians during the overnight attack. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous night, additional changes were recorded. The Russians, according to information we have, improved their positions in the Sumy direction, more precisely in the Krasnopolye direction. And these are the changes on the ground. This is the end of the 2nd of June of 2026, and this is the beginning of the 3rd of June of 2026. The Russians continue advancing, and the Russians, as we can see, right now are tasked to establish complete control over the villages of Mayskoye, Lesnoye and Zemlyane. If Russians take these villages under complete control, this will allow the Russians to outflank the settlement of Krasnopolye from the south, and from these positions the Russians would be able to continue advancing further in the northern direction. Another important area is the Kazachya Lopan direction. During the previous night, additional changes were also recorded in this area. So this is the end of the 2nd of June, and this is the beginning of the 3rd of June of 2026. The Russians improved their positions, and the Russians continue advancing further in the southwestern direction with the purpose to establish complete control over the settlement of Kazachya Lopan. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Ukrainians issued evacuation notes in this area, and several villages and towns from this area are obliged to start the complete and massive evacuation. So according to different sources, these territories the Ukrainians are planning to evacuate, and most likely the Ukrainians are planning to deploy forces with the purpose to stabilize the northwestern and the northern directions of the city of Kharkiv. Furthermore, the Russians continue advancing in the Belye Kolodets direction. Small changes were recorded. The Russians improved their positions to the south of the river of Volcha. The Russians are trying to secure the gap between the city of Belye Kolodets and the city of Vovchansk, and the Russians continue their offensive operation along the river of Volcha. In coming days, we expect that the Russians will try to establish complete control over the river and to force the Ukrainians to fall back further in the southern direction. Another important area is the Odradne direction. I would like to remind you that several weeks ago, pro-Ukrainian sources claimed that they managed to recapture the settlement of Odradne, but today we start receiving updates that the Russians began a counter-offensive operation, and as a result of this counter-offensive operation, the Russians have almost restored complete control over the territories they lost. Furthermore, the Russians intensified their offensive operation in the area of the river Voskol, and as a result of clashes, the Russians improved their positions around the settlement of Petroivanovka. Now we see that the Russians are trying to maintain the line towards the settlement by the name of Grigorovka, so the northeastern Kharkiv offensive operation is intensifying. As for the Zaporozhye Konstantinovka directions, during the previous 12 hours, we haven't received anything special. And that's it for the short video. The Military with Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye-bye.